Call on Alex Rowley. Up to 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I welcome the opportunity to speak in this debate today, following the motion that was raised for debate last week by my colleague Neil Findlay, where he highlighted some of the many concerns surrounding the Freedom of Information Act and the performance of this SNP government. I would like to reiterate concerns raised in Mr Findlay's motion, namely that the application of the Freedom of Information Act by ministers and officials is questionable at best and at worst implies a culture and practice of secrecy and cover-up, including through routinely avoiding sharing information, often through not recording or taking minutes of meetings that are attended by ministers and senior civil servants. Speaking from experience, and I am sure many members across this chamber can agree, the responses to Freedom of Information requests from the Scottish Government have been relatively poor. As such, Labour supports the calls for an independent inquiry into the way the Government deals with Freedom of Information requests and the potential to undertake post-legislative scrutiny of the Freedom of Information Act. In the interests of open government, and in particular full transparency of government, I hope today that the government can recognise that they can do more when it comes to dealing with such requests under the Act. Now, the government amendment today, in the name of Joe Fitzpatrick, which accepts the motion recognising that the Scottish Government has had poor performance in this area, is, in my view, welcome, as is the commitment of the Government to publish all material released under Freedom of Information. But I would say to Mr Fitzpatrick that he is stretching the imagination to then claim that this is a boost for open government. Personally, I think he misses the point, and most fair-minded people will see through this for what it is. There are many issues that must be addressed before we can seriously claim any boost in open government. As Neil Findlay pointed out in this chamber last week, just 2 weeks ago, 23 prominent journalists signed an open letter to this Parliament in which they raised very serious concerns about freedom of information requests and the way that they are being mishandled by this SNP government. In outlining the details of the complaints from the 23 journalists, Mr Findlay called for a proper investigation into the issues being raised, and that is why Labour will support the motion today. As well as looking at how freedom of information requests are dealt with, the inquiry presiding officer must also look at the level of information which is available. How can it be that government ministers are meeting with Quango chiefs, with business chiefs, with lobbyists, discussing issues that have major implications for the people of Scotland, and yet there is no record kept of such meetings? This is not right, and this Parliament must make clear that we expect to see openness and transparency in government. It has also been suggested that the Scottish Government officials and special advisers are delaying answers or simply rejecting questions. The whole point of the Freedom of Information Act should surely be to allow more openness and further transparency. It is not up to government ministers or officials or special advisers to decide what is in the government's interest to either disclose or not disclose. We also cannot ignore the fact that at times the responses to freedom of information requests seem more like they are dodging the questions than providing the answers. At its heart, freedom of information is about accountability. And this government must recognise that across this chamber and out with, there is a cry for further accountability, more openness and more transparency. By committing to an independent inquiry, the Government will show that it is committed to reviewing some of the damage it has done to the apparent open and transparent image it says it is committed to. Most importantly, Presiding Officer, there now needs to be change in the culture of how freedom of information requests are dealt with. The Government and this Parliament can show we want openness and transparency in all we do by supporting this motion today and indeed supporting the amendment from the SNP Government which acknowledges its weaknesses and commits to addressing them.